One.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Lose Your Ass podcast. We have a fun show tonight. No interviews tonight. Going to be a chill night. We're going to be talking a little wrestling. Going to be talking a little toothless aggression of Chris Benoit. Going to be going over the documentary, The Dark Side of the Ring. Deirdre has watched it, and as per usual, I have not.
Yeah. So, it's this program that's on Vice TV. It's called The Dark Side of the Ring. If you're into wrestling, you should definitely watch it. They have awesome episodes, stuff about Jimmy Snuka, the Brawl for All, the Montreal Screwjob, Owen Hart, all types, a whole list of different episodes about kind of the behind the scenes of these big moments that happened in wrestling. So they have 2 seasons, and they started this season, I think, in like March, right around the time that we were all getting quarantined. So so they started off this season with probably the most controversial day in wrestling history, when Chris Benoit was found murdered alongside his child Daniel and his wife Nancy, and it ended up being a double homicide and a suicide. So it was pretty dark day in wrestling, and then it brought up other issues that were in the wrestling organization, the wrestling business. But we'll start back with a little bit about Chris Benoit. So Chris Benoit was actually born in Canada, and he grew up going to Stampede Wet Wrestling. His hero was Dynamite Kid, who kind of had the same wrestling style as him, because they were both super duper small in the wrestling world. Small, but he really wasn't small. So he kind of adapted that, and he became a star in his time with WCW, WWE, ECW. He was, to a lot of people, the best technical wrestler to ever live.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. He was one of my favorites.
WrestleMania 20 was like one of my favorite. First off, it was one of my favorite WrestleManias ever.
Right.
When he won that triple, sick. I believe it was WrestleMania 20.
Right, and then
Shawn Michaels and Triple H, one of the greatest matches ever.
And then he had that moment in the ring with Eddie Guerrero that everyone was just like,
Yes.
This is what I'm rooting for. These 2 guys have worked their butt off in the ring. They went to Japan. They've kind of wrestled all over, and they've been wrestling since they were in their teens. I mean, Eddie Guerrero grew up in it, and to see them have that moment, it was incredible. They got to the top of the hill, and they got to the top of the hill together, and they were able to celebrate. Obvious.
Eddie Guerrero was what, the heavy? No,
he was the WWE champion.
Yes.
Benoit was the world heavyweight champion, and obviously beating 2 legends like Triple H, kind of Triple H prime time too. He was really, and then Shawn Michaels, obviously on the second leg of his career, but he had just come back. Remember, after that terrible back injury and fighting drug addiction. But Chris Benoit, he was incredible. Like, he was just an incredible technical wrestler. He knew how to make a match. He was one of the most respected guys in the wrestling business. He was a locker room leader.
He entered Royal Rumble at 1 and made it all the way through, eliminated everybody. And that's what led to that WrestleMania, that triple threat match.
Right. He was just incredible. But he started his career Stampede Wrestling, went to Japan. And then he made his way to WCW, which at the time was WWE's biggest competition. So they bring this guy in because of his incredible wrestling IQ, potential, his hard work. And he gets, I don't know exactly when this happened, but he gets booked in a feud with Kevin Sullivan. So Kevin Sullivan is one of the greatest bookers of our time. But he was a booker / wrestler, and his wife at the time was his valet or manager, and she kind of started the women's manager role. Like her and Miss Elizabeth kind of started it when they were with their husbands. So she was managing Kevin Sullivan, and in this feud, Kevin Sullivan made this feud that Nancy Benoit, who was Chris Benoit's wife, but at the time was Kevin Sullivan's wife, booked so that Woman was her name. They called her Woman. Would fall in love with Chris Benoit, which ended up happening, and that's kind of like the joke in the business is that Kevin Sullivan booked his own divorce. Because but we've heard that story before, like where people are in these relationship, these kayfabe relationships, but you're spending all this time together that it ends up that you fall in love. I mean, it happened with CM Punk and AJ Lee. It happened with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. Like, it happens. So this kind of all hit like ahead, I believe, of Bash at the Beach, where they had a match, Kevin Sullivan and Chris Benoit, and they just beat the crap out of each other, and like literally beat the crap out of each other, like blows to the head. I think Chris Benoit burst Kevin Sullivan's eardrum in this. So as like part of this documentary, Nancy Benoit's sister comes into is interviewed, and she talks about the backstage scene afterwards where Kevin Sullivan is saying, "Come on, let's go," and Chris Benoit is like, "I have your sister Nancy on the phone. You have to come with me." And Nancy, called her and said, "You will come back to the condo. Come with Chris." So they ended up going with Chris, and apparently, allegedly, there's no proof of this, but Kevin Sullivan was beating Nancy, and Chris kind of got her out of that bad situation.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was how Chris and Nancy started seeing each other and fell in love, was through this WCW feud. And yeah, it was it's crazy how life imitates, the work imitates life, I guess. But eventually after this, Chris leaves WCW because Kevin Sullivan was kind of like a bigwig, and obviously it's awkward if your boss, you stole his wife. So they eventually leave. Also, I don't think he was getting the opportunities that he wanted in WCW, so they were going to make the jump to WWE. So him, Perry Saturn, who they don't talk about in this documentary, but he was part of this the Radicals. I don't know if you remember them. It was Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and they all come to WWE. And Chris, like he was in WCW, it was killing it.
Yeah.
He was killing it. And, he had a couple really good feuds. I know with Triple H, Chris Jericho, tons of people to name it, but he never kind of got that level of fame that he was looking for. And I think a lot of that had to do with his size. Because he was, if you look at him,
he appeared plain.
What'd you say?
Because he appeared plain.
Yeah, but also like it's really creepy to look at like pictures of him from like even WCW and then the later years at WWE, like the drastic change that his body made. Because he was doing steroids, as was Eddie Guerrero, as was
Mhm.
a lot of the guys. This was like a normal thing in the locker room.
Yep.
But they touch on Eddie Guerrero in this documentary too. Obviously, it was Chris's best friend in the industry. I think Chris's best friend out of the industry too. Like he was just
Yep.
Chris's best friend.
Right.
But they both were kind of having the same issues. But I think Eddie's were a little bit more severe. Where
Mhm.
like they were talking about how Eddie, um, he had like 3 overdoses where they would have to put him to bed and like. But then I
Long
think
hand.
right, and then WWE like fired him and he went to get help, and then he came back and he was better than ever. And that's when
Yeah.
we saw those runs, and that's when we saw his feud with Kurt Angle, I believe it was, or was it Brock Lesnar?
You got both of them.
I think he had both of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously his tag team reigns with Chavo, Guerrero, and Rey Mysterio.
Right.
And then we also saw Chris Benoit have that incredible run, feuds with
Right.
Triple H, feud with Randy Orton, and then kind of get back to the back burner, but also had feuds. He was in the first ever Money in the Bank ladder match. They were both kind of at the prime of their career at the same time, and they were both doing what they needed to do. And obviously, that moment at WrestleMania that we talked about was kind of the height of both of their careers. And it's
Yeah.
sad to think, I think 2 or 3 years later after that, they were both dead, which is crazy. But so after all this happened, they talk about how Eddie passed away in
Mhm.
2005. I believe he passed away in like
Yeah.
November 2005.
Mhm.
And Chris was an absolute wreck after that. Like he was never the same. I said, and it was funny because Vicky Guerrero was in this documentary, and she was like, Nancy and Chris stayed with me for a little bit, and were helping with the kids. But I would find Chris like in Eddie's gym just crying, and I would console him. And I thought that was just such a interesting thing that the widow had to console his best friend.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, if
Because
you look at it, I know Ricky Guerrero was a part of WWE and everything, but if you really look at it, Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero probably spend more time together than
I mean,
Eddie
that's
and Vicky.
and that was another thing that they actually talked about in the documentary. Chris Jericho was bringing up like uh, he was telling Chris like, "Oh, I'm going to take off Halloween so I could be with my kids," and Chris Benoit was like, "Oh man, I wish I could take off Halloween. I wish I could take off Father's Day." And Jericho's like, "You can." He's like, "Nah," because he was so scared of people taking his spot. Like he didn't really, even at the level he was at, he had that old school mentality, which it eventually killed him. You know,
Yeah,
but
it's crazy to see that exactly the mentality that got you success is the exact
exactly.
mentality that tore him down.
And I think that's the same, unfortunately, with Eddie. But
It was
anyway,
that
Eddie,
push for greatness that
right,
destroyed.
right. So after Eddie died, like Nancy began to realize, um, Chris isn't the same. Like he was moody. He would isolate himself. He would whatever. Um, because he was just in this crazy depression. Um,
Yeah.
but it was like watching that documentary, and I've watched a lot of stuff on Chris Benoit because I was always interested, not in obviously what happened, but like interested in what was going on in his brain, what led to this,
Mhm.
and obviously it all went down after Eddie died, and I think that I don't know. Did you watch the Eddie Guerrero tribute that time on Raw?
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
he was the biggest mess out of everyone. Like he was so
Oh,
upset.
it was
I
terrible.
mean, when I think of that night, we were pretty young. I think of just Chris. It's
Yeah.
crazy how upset he was, and thus all that. Um, but I think that was like they said that was kind of the turning point. And I mean, then just the ruling schedule that WWE stars have. They're moving from city to city.
Nightly.
Right. So I'm gonna fast forward us a little bit now to the day or the weekend of the Benoit's death. So Chris Benoit called Chavo Guerrero. They were going to, I believe it was like an ECW. Like, you remember how they would just start ECW again? So Chris
Yes.
Benoit had just gone to ECW. I think he like the week before this terrible tragedy, and he was going to have a match with CM Punk, which was going to be the way to draw people in. Was this amazing match with these two amazing wrestlers? So I forgot what the pay-per-view was, but they had to go somewhere in Texas, and Chavo Guerrero and Armstrong, I forgot the name. I think it's a referee. Would travel with Chris, and they were waiting and waiting, and Chris goes, "Man, I don't know. I'm not gonna make it. Daniel and Nancy are super sick, and I gotta stay home." And Chavo Guerrero even's like, I've watched the podcast with him and Chris Jericho, and he was like, he probably had just killed them, and then he called me, which like that is probably the most chilling thing.
Oof.
He literally did this terrible thing and then called me and said,
Yeah.
and he was like, all right, well, so Chavo was like, all right, man, we'll wait, we'll wait for you, just get on the next plane, whatever. And he's like, all right, okay, I will. And apparently on Chris's computer was like planes, like plane tickets and stuff like that. Like, I think like if he could make it, and then like other stuff too, but it's just it's a creepy thing to think that you're one of your best friends who you were waiting for to travel in this job had just killed his family and called you. And Chavo says, he was like, hey, Chavo, I love you. Chavo's like, all right, love you too, man. And he's like, that was weird. I mean, we always said he loved each other, but he made sure to say it this time.
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah, that's eerie.
It is eerie. And then Chavo started getting text messages like, the dogs are in the back, the fence is locked, this is the code. And he got the text from Chris's phone and Nancy's phone. So whatever. So Chavo goes to the event because he doesn't want to get fired, but he starts but he's kind of covering for Chris because he doesn't want Chris to get in trouble. And he was like, yeah, no, I haven't heard from them. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And it was strange because he wouldn't miss like a house show, they were saying, but he missed this grand pay-per-view where he was supposed to win, and I think he was supposed to win the ECW championship to, I think, give it a little bit of validation that the ECW, that this wasn't just going to be a B show. Look, Chris Benoit has the title. And then the next day, no one heard from him. So security calls.
Jeez.
Like the head of security of WWE calls and is like, one of our talent is missing. This is totally out of character.
Yeah.
And the police go to the house, and that's where they find the things. But not even before they found it, but before they released it, I'm sure you watched it, the WWE released a tribute show to him.
Yes.
Yeah. So the tribute show obviously went on before knowledge of this incident took place. And before the incident, they knew exactly all the things. So you have these guys talking about Chris. I know Chavo said, "I would trust you with my life and my kid's life and my family's life." That hits hard once you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, all these
Sure.
details about what exactly happened.
Right.
And everyone kind of repeated the same thing. He was great. He loved his family. Daniel was fantastic. And Nancy was in the wrestling business, so
Yeah.
people knew her. Like, Nancy was obviously Kevin Sullivan's manager. I think she walked valeted for Ric Flair for a little bit. The Sandman, she was the Sandman's manager. So she has an extensive resume, so people know of her too.
Right.
So they're talking about all this, and it's everyone's kind of saying the same thing, and then all of a sudden William Regal gets on. And I didn't remember this because I was 12 or 13 at the time. You were probably, what, 11? No,
Yeah.
you're 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, 11. Yeah, at the time. So I didn't realize this until I started watching things. But William Regal goes, "I'm not going to talk about uh, his personal life or what a great man he was, but he was one of the hardest workers in the ring,"
Mm-hmm.
which is super telling considering that everyone else was talking about what an amazing father, what amazing this, what amazing that he was, and how people trust him. And William Regal, who was, I believe, pretty close to him, because William Regal was also uh, had a lot of respect as a veteran. Also, kind of didn't get what he deserved in the way of a push in WWE, in my opinion. But they've been together. Worked together for a long time. For him not to mention his personal life was very
Yeah.
strange for a
Yeah.
lot of people. And if you watch William Regal's back, you kind of are like, he knows something. So apparently, what people had initially thought was things started to come through at this time,
Okay.
like started getting released to media. But
If I'm not mistaken, I believe that William Regal is higher up in the WWE.
I don't think he was at the time. Like, I think that he was
Okay.
a respected veteran, but I believe he was still either managing, or I think he was still wrestling. He was definitely still wrestling. I think he might have been in like King Booker's court at the time.
Oh,
Remember?
okay.
Yeah. So I believe he was still doing that stuff. But people assumed, like, as the media got a hold of this story, that he just figured that out. When actuality, he lived in the same town and had heard about the domestic violence. There was a couple domestic violence issues
Yeah.
where they broke up, and he was very irritable.
Yeah.
So he had heard about this stuff. So I think he kind of knew what was going to be expected. So it's
That's a lot.
it is it's a lot to, like, think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
Because in one situation, it's like you love the guy because of the things he
right,
did on the, and obviously there was some other situations going on, but you still have to hold him accountable for his actions out of the ring,
right. And I think
regardless of the situation.
and I think the saddest part about that documentary was Chris Benoit's oldest son was on the documentary, and he was talking, and he was talking about how his dad was his hero, and how him and Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
Chris Benoit's son, who he killed,
Yeah.
they wanted to be the world tag team champions. They loved watching their dad. And you forget, and then, like, the documentary goes on and it talks about uh essentially WWE erasing Chris Benoit from their history books.
Yeah.
and they went on total damage control, obviously, and kind of disowned the Chris Benoit and the Benoit family. And to know that none of those bigwigs checked on Chris's son, his oldest son, was dealing with, he lost his brother, he lost his stepmom, who he was very close to. Then he lost his stepmom's family because of that, because they weren't, I'm assuming it's extremely awkward to talk to.
Yeah, I would say so.
So they weren't in discussion. He lost his dad, who then, not only can you not mourn the loss of your dad because he's being portrayed in the media, and as he should be, as a murderer, as a monster who kills their son, who kills and their wife, and apparently the way that he killed Nancy was vicious. Vicious, absolutely vicious. Like Daniel was a little bit more. I mean, it was his son. He's he drugged him with Xanax so that he wouldn't feel, but apparently with Nancy, it was absolutely brutal. Breaking her back and just. But it's just, and then you hear about the stuff that came out afterwards, and especially his son was like, 2 people checked on me, 2 of his friends from the WWE checked on me to see how I was doing, and he was a kid, he wasn't. I think probably at most maybe our age. I'm not 100% sure, but maybe a little bit older. But still, in the same sense, he lost his brother, he lost his dad, he lost his stepmom. His dad's a monster, and this legacy that his father built up. I mean, he was a surefire Hall of Famer. Gets knocked down. Gets knocked down within a matter of days, and you can't even search Chris Benoit on WWE anymore. He's gone from there, from the website. It's just such a, and nobody says his name anymore.
No.
They don't talk about it. They did damage control. Yeah, no, he wasn't.
Never look back.
Yeah.
They didn't move on from it. They just swept it under the rug like it never happened.
They swept it under the rug and then enforced policies that would keep them out of trouble in case something like this happened.
Exactly.
Because they had the drug. That's when the drug enforcement, between him and Eddie Guerrero, that's when the drug policy became a legit drug policy. Because even they had text messages that Nancy had sent to Chris, and it was like, you need to get help. You're out of control. I'm not dealing with this anymore. And we all know the drug policy is a joke.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then what people don't realize is because you talk to your friends about, I think everyone has had to talk about, especially after the Aaron Hernandez thing came out, CTE and football players. People don't understand the CTE, and I don't think it's as bad now because of the precautions that they took, but the CTE that the wrestlers face. Because people are like, oh, it's fake.
Benoit, whose one of finishing moves was a headbutt.
Yeah. And the 2 guys who kind of used that before him, so it was Harley Race and the Dynamite Kid, both are wheelchair bound now.
Yeah.
They can't. I don't know about Harley Race, but I know that his spine was messed up and he couldn't live a fulfilling life because of that. So they warned him not to do it, but he did it. And it's just it's so sad that the wrestlers with the CTE don't get the recognition that a football player does.
Because
people are like, it's fake. yes, it's predetermined, but it's not fake.
Right.
I mean,
It's
there's count
predetermined to be hitting with intention to hurt, but they're still hitting. The
exactly,
move is happening.
and especially then, like it's a little bit more, but especially then with the chair shots and the, I mean, it
You can't
was
fake a steel chair in the head.
exactly, which they eventually, because of this, they had to change. They
Yeah.
changed the way the rules. I think this had a big reason as why they turned to PG
Yes, without a doubt.
because of this terrible tragedy that happened. Um, and a lot of people could say that at the hands of WWE. And I'm not saying it's because of WWE, but I don't I don't think it helped. Um, there's so many different reasons why people say that he did this,
Yeah.
and one of them
And we're probably all wrong.
was roid rage,
Yes.
which a lot of people debunked. A lot of people who took steroids debunked that theory. Two was the depression from Eddie Guerrero's death, which I mean, I think that had part to do with it. He didn't have someone to talk to who he normally would go to.
Right. That's true.
And three, head trauma, which
Yeah.
I
That
mean,
makes the most.
so after his funeral, which nobody showed up to, nobody checked on the kid. WWE sent uh, a JR, who was at the time, he was vice president of operations, I believe. Also, he did the commentary, but he didn't just do
Yeah.
commentary. He also ran talent relations. They sent him to Nancy Benoit's funeral almost as just to look good because they don't
And to
mention
show.
her anymore. Yeah, exactly. And they like kicked them out. They're like, "What are you doing here? Like, you
Yeah.
don't belong here."
Right. Right.
But
Why? That's
yeah,
why.
it's it, it's insane. And then so after his funeral, everyone's kind of asking why did this happen? Um and Chris Nowitzki, who is a former WWE wrestler and a Harvard graduate in neuroscience, he kind of found some CTE type thing, and he asked to study Chris's brain.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently Chris's brain was like of an 80 something year old dementia patient.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Super duper I'm not a doctor or a neuroscience, but there was some calcium something in the marks in the brain where, like, if you looked at his brain and another brain similar to the Aaron Hernandez situation, it just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't it wasn't.
Wasn't.
No. um but then Vince McMahon debunked that and said he wouldn't be able to do what he was doing with this brain, and I mean, it's just it's a sticky situation, and I felt so bad watching this for his son because
Right.
after his dad died, he lost his brother, obviously, stepmom, dad. Uh, he was getting bullied in school. Nobody in WWE checked on him to make sure that he would be okay.
Yeah.
He was, and he's now trying to get. I've read some stuff about him trying to get into the wrestling business, but it's impossible because of his last name.
Yeah. Exactly.
But he's didn't do anything.
Right. Exactly. He didn't do it.
He didn't
So
do
why?
it. He was a kid
Right.
who then had to be, not only his father died, but his father died in such a public way that it's all over
Right.
the news.
Exactly. Yeah. He'll never have a regular life.
No. And that was the sad part. Probably the saddest part about it was just listening to
Where was Where was he at the time? Was he like with his mom?
He was with his mom, so he
Okay.
was in Edmonton um, when he found out, which is also shitty because you're so far away from
Yeah.
where it happened, and it's just, as a kid, how do you wrap your brain around it? Like, my dad killed my brother, and I
Yeah.
can't even mourn that. Like, he couldn't go to his brother's funeral.
Right. That's That's awful.
And then
It's
you're trying to
awful.
get into this business, which I must say, Chris Jericho, who, not that I never was a fan of his, I always thought he was a good
Mhm.
wrestler, and I always thought he was,
Yeah.
cool, but he eventually brought, at the end of this documentary, he brings um, Nancy Benoit's sister, uh,
Mhm.
Sandra, and Chris Benoit's son David back together because they spent time together when he was a kid, and they went and they watched wrestling together, and now they talk, and they're able to share that experience with each other because of Chris Jericho, who, I give him all the power in the world. He is an executive producer of these Dark Side of the Ring um, series, and this series, like, he to bring up Chris Benoit is not an easy topic to do, and he brought it to light. I
Yeah.
think from what I saw, and this was just the YouTube, over 1 million people were able to view it and were able to see and were able to kind of not even understand, but like kind of get
Yeah.
clarity, because I think that we as fans just kind of saw him go away, and the media paints wrestling, and the media is always going to go after wrestling because wrestling, they don't consider a sport, and they don't
Yeah.
consider them athletes, and this is for so they went after it. The media came up with such ridiculous things, like uh
As you-
right, like he was mad that he got kicked out of the Four Horsemen. Well, that happened like 15 years ago. He had it like, that wasn't it. um Someone else said something.
Nobody really knows.
No, no, but the
You know,
media,
nobody really knows what happened at that time,
right?
what happened in the moment where his mind snapped. We don't know.
No,
It was could have been a combination of a lot of things.
tons of stuff, tons.
You know, I mean, I think that's really the ultimate answer to the question is that we don't know, and
Nah,
it's horrible that it happened. Um, and nothing is going to change that.
no, it's unfortunate.
It's definitely a combination of a few things. For anybody that's trying to get a full answer, we'll never know that
No,
because we don't know what was going through his mind.
no. And I mean, there's been
Period.
there's been conspiracy theories that he didn't do it. He was set up.
Yeah,
Uh, and then there was
for what
also this
you know,
Wikipedia. Then there was also this Wikipedia thing where the day before it came out, or 2 days before it came out, um, Nancy's like Wikipedia page was altered and said that she was murdered,
hmm,
which is also a very creepy thing.
yeah,
But I mean, they checked this out, and it was just someone, I guess, being stupid. But like, what?
yeah,
It's a it's a weird thing. But this
yeah.
overall, this documentary, if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. Dark Side of the Ring, Benoit, Chris Benoit, the Benoit tragedy. I think it might be. Um, it's the way that they do, and the way that this Dark Side of the Ring just does. All of these episodes is absolutely incredible. I am so impressed by it. Every time I watch it, I'm like, wow, this is
Hmm,
just getting more impressive as it goes on.
yeah,
But yeah, it was they did a very good job of showing that he wasn't just a monster, and that he was a
right.
human, and
That's
giving
good.
takes from everyone in his life, kind of. And it's Definitely check out the series if you haven't, because they have other things other than the Benoit tragedy. But overall, this documentary was super. Obviously, it's sad. I don't want to say it was incredible and amazing, but very informative, and people should definitely check it out, especially if you're into learning more about CTE. It's not just a football player thing.
Yeah.
So.
All right. That brings us to the conclusion of tonight's episode.
Yes.
That was definitely interesting. I'm going to check that out. I have to
Yeah,
watch that.
for sure. All
And,
right.
back tomorrow.
Yeah, back tomorrow. We will be talking about some more current events. Our current events thing will be up. I think it's already up. I think I actually just posted. Maybe
Okay.
not. But our current events from last night is up. Jagara Davis interview
Yep.
is up. More interviews coming tomorrow. Next week, James doesn't know this yet, so this is going to be fun for him. We're going to have our boy AJ Allen back to talk a little bit about this Canadian football season.
Really?
Over. Yeah, he's going to join us and
Awesome.
give us a little bit about that, because as much as we are new CFL fans, we are still learning a little bit about the Canadian football scene, and AJ is kind of like our consultant.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Super exciting. That's great news.
It is. It's awesome news. Great guy.
Yes.
And we are
Very astute. Can't wait.
duper excited. Also, if you're watching this, check out our new friends at Dirty Heels podcast. If you like wrestling, they have everything about it. New friends with us. Got linked to them by Super Nitro. They have all different types of wrestling things. And it's pretty fantastic. So check out Dirty Heels. They are subscribed to us. We are subscribed to them. Check them out if you're into wrestling. James and I are going to try to get back into wrestling. We've kind of been on a hiatus, I guess, from watching it, but we're going to try to get into AEW, which we're super excited about. But that's it for tonight. And
all right. As always, stay safe, stay well.